Out here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week it's going to be the turn of Terry Newman, who I spoke to very recently to find out more about life, love, poetry and all that other groovy stuff. Lectures at the University for the Creative Arts in Epsom, but has had a life in culture, fashion, style, music, creativity and all that other groovy stuff. Originally it was ID magazine, Attitude, and then has gone through loads of other bits and pieces, which you'll find out about in this interview. It's fascinating. But has just brought a book out on the world of Taylor Swift and her style clothes and much more. This is out on ACC Art Books and is available from all good bookshops and also online. She's also done a load of other books which have been fascinating that you'll hear about in this interesting interview. So look, after several minutes of interesting but casual chat, we get down to that exciting subject that was the early formative years, both musically, culturally and all the other stuff. Anyway, Terry, it's over to you.
Well, I was thinking about this the other day, and for me, it was a kind of really curious moment when I saw Blondie on Top of the Pops or somewhere that, there was so rarely did you see music on television, but it was Blondie, and it was when her album Parallel Lines was out, and I just remember thinking she looked fantastic, and I was quite young at the time, and I don't think I'd even ever bought an LP or a record before, but that was the first album that I went out and bought just because I loved her look so much. So for me, and the music was that kind of slight kind of new wave punky kind of stuff, and I just thought it was fantastic and so different to anything that I'd kind of come across before, because all I'd done is like listen to my dad's country and western sort of songs at home and that kind of thing.
Yes.
But yeah, I thought Blondie just looked and sounded amazing, rather like David Bowie, I suppose, as well.
Yes. Well, I think we lucked out there because both Debbie Harry and David Bowie were so iconic, really. And actually, my first single was Space Oddity, followed by Rod Stewart's Sailing, I have to admit. But the third one was Blondie's Denise, which was this kind of very snappy 2.5-minute song that I remember being mesmerized on Top of the Pops with. And then, yes, then fell in love with that album Parallel Lines, as you mentioned, because it had some incredible songs, and then Eat to the Beat. And yes, it was just like love at first sight, really. And also she had such great confidence and sort of swagger about herself. So
and even to this day as well, she's a great performer. She's still got it. Yeah, she still looks great.
Yes, absolutely. That's amazing. So then, as the 80s progressed, and I'm sort of, it was quite an interesting time. And that was kind of, I suppose, one of my decades of when I was a bit older. I mean, we had that kind of, there was a huge amount of styles in the 80s with, there was goth, there was new romantics, there was psychobilly, there was, I suppose, the punk movement was still happening with those sort of spiky looks. What was your kind of 80s like? Or were you a bit younger than me at this stage?
No, I'm kind of in the same ballpark, honestly. But I mean, when I talk about fashion history and music history to my students, because I lecture as well as write, I'm always kind of conscious of of explaining that there were so many interesting things going on in every decade. In the 80s, absolutely. So in some respects, it's like you said, we still had that kind of goth look going on. We had the new romantics going on, but also, hip hop was kind of like kicking in, and there were all sorts of subcultural sort of clothes and music that were really resonant. So for me, I suppose my earliest 80s kind of thing was I suppose two-tone and that kind of sort of ska music. And I was quite young. I was at sort of, I don't know, at school and wasn't really old enough to be interested in it. But some of the older kids liked it. And I just remember thinking, again, it was just this fusion of music and clothes that really mesmerized me. So that was probably a bit before, the new romantics and all of that kind of stuff. But I thought they had such a strong look. And recently I went to see the Dance Crazy documentary, which is just basically a film of loads of gigs, which obviously I never went to see. And it's so interesting because half of the audience look very stylish, and half of the audience looked just very normal. So I think you kind of had to make an effort to sort of engage with looking like your idols, and sort of, and maybe you had to be a bit brave as well to sort of dress up and stuff like that. But that was my awakening, I suppose. Two-tone
Yes.
and scar. Yeah.
Well, there was a guy who's putting these books out at the moment. I don't know if he's probably still got some projects. Sam Neill, who's quite a lot of books on, especially he's focused a lot on music and tribes. And I suppose music at that point was very tribal, which young people probably, I don't know if they can relate to that. But you had to kind of pick a band and then that kind of type of music. But then you couldn't like anything else. So if you were into two-tone, you weren't going to be into heavy metal. And if you were into heavy metal, you definitely weren't going to be into new romantics. I mean, and it was quite sort of a fear. It was a little bit sort of such a lot of identity with clothes at that stage, and who you hung out with, and yes, who your role models were. I think that's where music, clothes, and those kind of scenes developed so strongly, and that's why probably so many people are still analysing or have gone back and looked at the 80s with kind of more curiosity, because it kind of was very, there was so many different groups and then little subsections, because the two-tone was like 90, was it 79 to about 81, 82. And then,
Yes. Yeah.
most scenes changed, don't they? And then you had the Smiths come along in 83 with Morrissey. And then and there was other scenes, because you mentioned New Romantics. There was also the Blitz Kids. And then as we progressed, interesting enough, the drugs changed, and you had ecstasy, and then we had sort of the baggy look as well with another.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, you mentioned the Smiths, so they were that was the first kind of band that I went to see, and it was also exciting and very alternative in a kind of scruffy way. And then it was all about dressing up, but then, like you said, then then acid house started, and it was all very baggy again. But I think what's interesting is that this sort of end of the 90s, we saw this kind of real sort of fast moving kind of trend cycle, which meant that everybody started mixing and matching. So today, I think that the sort of generation of young person that I sort of lecture to, they don't understand the concept of sort of a kind of having to make a decision on who you were. One day they can dress up in like Blondie, the next they can reference Boy George, and the next they'll go and look like someone from Mad Men or something. So it's like they just have no kind of loyalty in a way to sort of looking sort of subculturally sort of savvy. It doesn't kind of occur to them, I think, that they can't do everything they want all the time, which is, I
No.
guess, fun. It's great.
Yes, but I get it's an interest. I'm not sure how I'd cope. I preferred sort of just sticking to one band, because the Smiths were my band for 5 years. So Meat is Murder and sort of flailing around, sort of being quite
Oh yeah, we were probably at the same gigs then. Yeah, absolutely.
sort of feeling very sort of heart-wrenched about all those kind of very deep and meaningful lyrics by dear old Morrissey. So yes,
Yeah.
it was a kind of glorious time. And also I think with pop music, there is a kind of a 5-year narrative, and there's kind of, in those days, or possibly three to five, where a band would get together, they'd have that 12-month honeymoon period, then they would get a John Peel session, an album, then that kind of second, third album if they're lucky, and then their kind of dynamics within the band would explode, and that was the end of that. But 5 years is normally a good thing. And what I also realized was that every 5 years there's a new wave of 16, 18-year-olds come along, and they're looking for their own identity. Well, they did back then, I suppose. But yes, so then
Yeah, no, there's always a nation. There's a cycle of everything's a cycle, isn't it? Everything kind
yes.
of comes into fashion, then goes out of fashion, then it ultimately comes back into fashion as well at some point.
Yes, so then just briefly then, how did you then sort of go from the 80s flailing around with Morrissey to your next kind of step into ID magazine and Attitude?
Well, that was quite interesting. I mean, for me, I suppose I hadn't really kind of, I didn't have a kind of career game plan, but I knew that I always wanted to write. And basically, I sort of, I'd read ID when I was younger, and I'd been, really, pored over lots of different kind of style magazines. But I actually had my first job was working with a young designer, and I worked with her, a woman called Lulu Guinness. It was just the two of us in her basement making handbags. And I worked there for a long time, and she kind of gave me confidence to sort of, I don't know, kind of feel that I could kind of do things in a way. When you're kind of young, you're sort of not really sure. Anyway, I knew people who worked at ID magazine, but I couldn't afford to sort of work there, without getting paid. And a job came up as the dog's body. So I went and worked as the dog's body. But when I was there, it was a really magical time, sort of in the mid-90s, when the magazine was still independent and it was really run by the staff. We didn't have to answer to anybody. It was literally about kind of writing and pointing out things that you're really interested in. So I worked there, and I made it kind of quite clear that I wanted to write, and also at the time I wanted to style as well. So eventually I was given the chance to do that, and then ultimately given my own pages. So I learned everything at ID magazine, and I owe so much to the fashion editor there, Edward Enninful, who's obviously gone on to bigger and better things. But it was a time when you could kind of just feel very free, and there were so many young designers coming up that were really quite groundbreaking and kind of pioneering in so many different ways. That moment in the 90s, I sort of analysed it time and time again, because, as you say, sort of music and fashion and art, it all came together in a really sort of magical way that maybe had something to do with the fact that we were kind of hurtling towards the end of hurtling towards the millennium, and everybody was kind of feeling quite experimental and sort of, I don't know, there was something in the air anyway at that moment in time. But working at ID was a real, it was just, I learned everything there, and I learned to sort of be confident and just like what you like, and sort of, it was just very exciting, really. So I worked there for a long time, actually, and while I was working there, I got offered a job at Attitude magazine, which obviously I really loved as well. So I ended up kind of going part-time at ID and part-time at Attitude, and working for both of the magazines. So there was a real sort of breadth of experience there, working, with all the boys at Attitude, having lots of fun. But even at that time, it was such an important magazine, because it was before the internet had really kind of started in any significant way. And what I realized very quickly was, even though it was a very fun and jolly and exciting magazine to work for, it meant so much to so many people, because we used to get letters from kids from all over the world who would write in and say, you just don't know how much it means to me to know that a magazine like Attitude is out there. And I realize I'm not alone, because I'm here in a small town or a village or a place where, being gay wasn't accepted. So I felt very passionate and very happy working there as well. It was a really sort of important time in my life, I think, working at those magazines. It was very free and it was really fun, but also I felt, it was kind of important as well, because at ID I championed young designers and I wrote about that. It was just it was a really magical time.
Yes, because I think, so much happened, because obviously we can remember sort of the 80s and how, people would be blackmailed about their sexuality, weren't they? The press would be saying, we've got something on such and such a politician or entertainer, and we're going to bring them down. And, people forget that was kind of like such a taboo subject, wasn't it? And it seemed incredibly brave when people like, Bronski Beat and were about, or Boy George. It did seem such a sort of, there were so many attitudes which are still hung over from the sort of the 50s and 60s on that whole world, really. So
and it was, there was a lot still a load of barriers still to break down, and you kind of can't really think about it like that sometimes, because it seems such a short time ago. But thankfully things have changed a bit and are still changing. So that's good. Yeah.
Yes, God, I know. So we went from the Thatcher years to John Major to New Labour, which obviously there was a huge shift, wasn't there, in kind of energy during that time of kind of creativity and and especially magazines. They really did become a thing in the 90s and the O years. I think it was a kind of a glory period, wasn't it? Because I suppose, I don't know if you've looked at Paul Gorman, he seems to document a lot about the face, didn't he? And
Oh
there was
yeah, he's amazing. I love his book about the face. It's fantastic. Yeah, he's a really interesting writer, and I think he's got a really interesting take on that kind of moment in time. Absolutely.
Yes, it's I sort of find them all kind of very fascinating because, again, the magazine was an identity, which one you were going to buy and what that said about you. It was
Mm.
also angsty in the 80s and 90s, wasn't it? Well, the 80s especially. So that was good. So then coming to your latest book, which is quite incredible. So this is a sort of a series of books that you brought together, which started with writers, and authors, then artists, and then you've done this series of kind of like the zeitgeist in Billie Eilish, Harry Styles, Beyonce, and then Taylor Swift, which you couldn't
Yes,
have picked a better
yes.
time really to yes, capture that moment. So with the first one, authors, did you get was that a commission that you were offered on that?
Well, I think that what happened was I sort of I really wanted to write a book because I kind of got a bit tired of working as a journalist because as we were talking about the 90s, it was just very fast and frenetic, and I suddenly wanted to kind of slow down a little bit and not really slow down, but I wanted to kind of celebrate things in a slightly different way. So I had this kind of ambition to write a book, and I spent many years sort of like, thinking of proposals and trying to work out ideas. But eventually I sort of thought about what would be my absolute dream book, and it would be a book about books and clothes. And so I put together a proposal and spoke to an agent who immediately sort of saw the idea, and anyway, it very luckily it got commissioned by HarperCollins in New York, and that was the first book I wrote on my own. I'd contributed to other books before, but it was just this idea that when I was growing up, as well as music, um, my kind of refuge was reading books, and I was as interested in who the authors were and what they wore, as well as what they wrote. I thought the two went together, and I always thought it was very fascinating. And so I'm interested in fashion, but I'm also interested in outsiders and people who go their own way. And one of the things about authors is that people don't expect them to be fashionable, but the more I looked at it, the more I realized how influential many sort of writers have been, and lots of designers take reference to the sartorial codes of authors. So anyway, that was my idea, and I got the commission. And then I sat down on the first day to write it, and the first author that was on my list to write about was Samuel Beckett. And I thought, oh no, I've kind of really gone and done it now, because I don't think I can write about Samuel Beckett's clothes. But I steeled myself, and I suddenly realized my ideas did work, and I found out, lots of really interesting things about his clothes sense, also how he used clothes in his books and in his plays. So it all went very well, and to my utter surprise, the book was a real success. And people thought that it was the oddest combination of things to talk about, but to me, it always felt very, very natural and kind of obvious in a way.
Yes.
So that's how that happened.
Yes, it's interesting. I did go and see Donna Tartt once when she was doing a reading at the
Oh,
UEA.
amazing, amazing. What was she? So, what did you think?
Oh, she was stunning. I really liked her book, her book, the two first books anyway that I read.
Mm,
And then I thought I'd really wanted to go and see her live. And she just had such an amazing kind of Southern Gothic quality, doesn't she? And I was slightly
yeah,
mesmerized, and everything about her is so, incredible. How do people pull that look off? It's just fantastic. So yes, there's a lot of people who are kind of, I'd say, a bit more obvious, like Oscar Wilde or Quentin Crisp, but then and Tom Wolfe. But then people like
yes.
Donna Tartt is just I don't know. I just loved her voice. I sort of mesmerized watching interviews with her as well. So
Well, I think the thing about Donna Tartt is that obviously she's got that kind of whole Southern romanticism about her. But when you look at her, she's got a real androgyny and a kind of boyish quality that to me kind of taps in a little bit to the sort of 20s and the sort of that kind of moment in time. But one of the things, I mean, I'm just, because obviously I'm a huge fan of Donna Tartt as well, but when I was researching all about her, that, you know, what I found was that she also romanticized the clothes that authors wore. So I actually was very cheeky, and I wrote to her agent, and I said, oh, you know, I don't suppose she'd be interested in writing an introduction to the book. I mean, obviously I was completely, you know, out of line asking her to do such a thing, but I got a firm no back, but I did get a message saying that she was really interested in the book. So that was as thrilling as anything. And as a fan, I'm sure you'd understand that.
Yes, no, absolutely. Yes, it was The Secret History, and then it was the Little Friend, wasn't it? I do remember. Yes, those years of reading Donna Tartt, which was good. So look, and then sort of trucking, and so then obviously that was successful. You did Artist, and then the kind of the modern pop artist as well, and finishing, well, not finishing, but sort of coming up to Taylor Swift. So how did this then become a kind of ongoing project?
Well, I suppose, well, the Harry Styles book, I mean, I'll be completely honest about this. It was during the pandemic, and a publisher approached me and had really liked my first two books and said that they wanted me to write a book in a similar vein about Harry Styles. And I said, well, I'm not sure I'm really the best person to write about Harry Styles, because I don't really know anything about him that much. And they said, no, but you know about fashion. And so I said, okay, well, let me have a think about it. And I thought about it. And one of the things that I haven't really addressed is the fact that, you know, fashion today is really about celebrity, and you know, it has become a very different phenomenon. So I had a look at Harry, and I thought I could write this book if I could write it as a music fashion history book. So that's what I did, and I got really into it, and it was absolute joy to write. And actually, obviously, I'm a huge fan now of Harry Styles, you know, having discovered all I can about him and the clothes that he wears. So that was what happened there, and I really enjoyed writing it. And I suppose in the past I've always been slightly kind of, you know, I hadn't really kind of paid attention to the sort of whole really big sort of stardom of fashion and music. And what I found was that it's just such a relevant and interesting conversation that I thought it'd be really fun to do the same with other pop stars that have got interesting kind of takes on the clothes that they wear. So the publisher's been brilliant and given me this opportunity to write a series. And the way I've approached them is very much as a sort of, it's kind of like a fashion biography of the musicians. So it's kind of putting their clothes under a microscope and sort of analysing them from different kind of perspectives. And so that's where we are now with Taylor Swift, you know, and that was an absolute pleasure to write. And obviously she's fantastic. I'm a huge Swiftie. And there was something really, really wonderful about writing about such a talented and sort of interesting and secure and confident and influential pop star, you know, who's a really strong woman as well. So it's been a real journey for me. And I think one of the things why I like to write is because when you write, you're always learning about new things. So I've got a kind of a sort of fashion history and fashion sort of perspective on as an expert, if you like, but then you can kind of throw that lens on different subjects and really kind of flesh it out in an interesting way. So Taylor's been absolutely brilliant, and she's, you know, the book's selling like hotcakes, so that's also really thrilling for me as well.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it does capture, a certain kind of perfect timing, really, with this massive tour that she's just undertaken and the cinema release, which I did go to the cinema to see it because I thought I needed to sit on the big screen, and someone recommended it, and it was incredible. And actually, one thing you said there was secure, because what boggled me was the fact that somebody who's so under the spotlight all the time, plus that whole world of social media, and then trying to, record and write material, having issues with the record label, which everyone will have at some time, but has navigated it better than probably someone like Prince, and has
Yeah.
been kind of like quite clever with it, and sort of hasn't sort of fallen by the wayside and hasn't been destroyed by this kind of this thing, which is it's kind of meant, it's beautiful, but then it's ferociously mean as well, as we can see with, the world has been littered with kind of singers and artists who just can't deal with the kind of what happens when the dream becomes reality, and then that reality becomes a nightmare, and then you ended up in the gutter like Oscar Wilde looking at the
Yeah.
stars. So
Yeah.
it's kind of, Secure was kind of, yes, for me, I thought, that's incredible. So with her, did you already have a certain idea of who she was and what she'd done since her sort of work in I suppose it was the mid-O years, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've always been aware of who she is, and always been kind of quite sort of, kind of absolutely impressed, because she's always seemed like this kind of shooting star that could kind of do no wrong. So I was fascinated to kind of like, delve a bit deeper. But what you said is absolutely right, because um we kind of expect sort of our geniuses to be tortured, and have some, creative people to have some kind of, Shakespearean flaw or something. And, that people are always kind of waiting for people to trip up or fail, or I don't know, be dysfunctional in one way or another. And I suppose that's part of the kind of, interest in people's lives, that people are fallible. But what's been so interesting and so amazing, looking at her and watching her career, from a long time ago, really before I started writing the book, is that she's just managed to navigate the world in such a sure-footed way. And it kind of goes to sort of prove that, you don't have to be creative, you don't have to fail. You can just do it right. And that's so exciting. I suppose in a way, we had David Bowie, who was so sort of amazing. Obviously, he kind of, went in and out of drug rehab and all the rest of it. But his creativity kind of endured right up until he passed away. And so there are these kind of amazing people. And I just think she's one of those amazing people.
Yes, I agree. I mean, I didn't sort of, I came sort of late to the party. I'd heard a couple of singles, which I thought, wow, these are catchy. But it was during her lockdown, and she brought an album out called Folklore that I became quite
Oh, yeah.
fascinated. And
Yeah.
I really loved some of those songs. I thought they were amazing lyrical content, and also musically, they were just intriguing. And she worked with different people, and I was just like really taken by it, and then sort of started to sort of work backwards and then sort of work forwards, and obviously, ended up watching the film and getting the book. So it was quite interesting. And then sort of seeing the detail, because you mentioned Bowie, and I've always found him fascinating, because the stuff that he did in the 60s, like the mod stuff, and various other bits and pieces, his art lab with his kind of curly hair, kind of were kind of experiments that weren't kind of going anywhere. But then in the 70s, he brought out, one album basically a year. He, different characters. He did, relocated different films, but he was always very obsessed with the image and the camera and photography, and sort of bringing kind of costume to the party, which kind of helped him, I think, as a performer, become David Bowie from David Jones, his kind of real self. Because I think when he started, he wanted to write for other people to sing his songs, but realized that no one was going to sing them, so he became that performer. So it was interesting seeing how Taylor Swift has also changed her style over the years, and she's kind of, again, to quote, Lou Reed, she's kind of been growing up in public quite a lot, which must be quite challenging. But at the same time, there isn't that kind of, oh dear, she's really going through a bad phase, which is amazing in this day and age.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that I think it is really interesting, because the thing is, she's such a talented songwriter, as you pointed out, and musician. It's almost like the image could be left to one side, but she's got the kind of magic balance of a great image, and as well as a musical talent, and those fused together rather, like Bowie did as well, and like Harry Styles as well. These people are so talented, they could just focus on the music and go out wearing a t-shirt almost, and sing the songs that they've written. But there is something quite magical when you see it both when you see both of those things fused together on stage.
Yes, and with someone like Taylor Swift and doing this book, did you find that it's her that's really interested in the image, or do you feel that there's people around her that she's got very good sort of a creative team that kind of nudge her in different directions?
Well, I think that, when I think honestly, when you look at stars as big as Taylor Swift and Beyonce and Harry Styles and even, Rihanna and Billie Eilish to a certain extent, you know, they have to have a team around them, a team of people who help them be the person that they are. But I think that where the expertise comes in is kind of choosing your team and being secure in your choices. And what I think about Taylor is that she doesn't follow trends. She kind of takes a step back from that particular way of kind of engaging with fashion, and she does her own thing, which I think is really refreshing. And it does feel authentic. It does feel like it's her making those choices. I have no doubt that people bring her racks of, if she says, "Oh, I want a red dress," or "I want this or that," I'm 100% sure she gets people bringing her those things. But I think that ultimately the style choices she makes do feel like a reflection of her.
Yes, it's quite interesting. There's a lovely chapter you've got on it, which you've got your Jimi Hendrix picture, haven't you, with his and sort of reference that film which I really had loved, Velvet Goldmine,
Oh,
um,
yes, yeah.
which was kind of amazing. So it's kind of interesting seeing. I love the way that you sort of bring these kind of influences together. There's another chapter or piece that you got Get Shorty talk about bloomers and her with her kind of acknowledging the 60s kind of shorts and sort of these styles. So do you enjoy that aspect of modern fashion and seeing where it's been sort of borrowed from or sort of adapted from?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, that's where sort of my kind of more academic work comes in, because I sort of taught fashion history a lot, and that's the way I came to fashion, looking at what had been. And the thing is, of course, fashion, as I said, is a cycle. So there are always going to be these kind of references, and almost nothing is new in fashion. It's always been done before. But what's interesting is how people refresh it. And so joining the dots is one of my favorite games to play. Yeah.
Yes. And do you find with her and like seeing other artists, do you feel that she's managing that journey in fashion and being able to present herself or sell herself better than other people who you feel they've kind of lowered the bar and it's a bit sort of, I don't know, I suppose more pornographic. Whereas do you sort of find that, with someone like Taylor Swift, she's managing to sort of navigate that journey a bit better than other artists?
I think well, to put it succinctly, I think, yeah, she's very classy, and she hasn't really, as far as I can tell, put a step wrong. She does things the way she wants to, and she's managed to kind of navigate that kind of terrain where pop stars are expected, especially young girl pop stars are sort of expected to be kind of sex kittens. She's kind of done it her own way. It might be because she's come from country roots, and so that's been the sort of slight angle at the beginning. But I think she's a role model in many different ways, and just kind of being very happy to do things the way she wants to is very laudable.
Yes. Well, from her first album right through to the latter part of her career, what would you say has been the major kind of changes in her style and her sort of look and confidence?
Well, I think one of the things that I really enjoy about Taylor Swift is the fact that she obviously has fun with clothes. And so, she went through I suppose, like a fairy headband phase, which isn't everybody's cup of tea, but she just owns it. If she likes something, she owns it. And so I suppose for me, just kind of having a real playful approach to clothes, and that's the thing that really kind of holds everything she does together. That's what I kind of enjoy most. But you're right. She's certainly grown up in the public eye, and for that reason as well, you know, many claps her way, because I don't know many people who could kind of look back at themselves when they were 20 and still feel kind of happy for people to be poring over pictures of them, and you know, it's just, no, she's just kind of not really put a step wrong. I don't think she's not been kind of like, as I say, engaging in trends, but she's not out of style either for that very reason. So all of her kind of choices just feel like her.
Yes, that's interesting. Because I did go and see Bowie, the exhibition at the V&A, David Bowie is. Do you imagine that in a few years' time, the V&A will also have an exhibition of some of these amazing outfits and styles coupled with her kind of musical output?
Yeah, I mean, I don't doubt it. I mean, the V&A are very good at doing these blockbuster exhibitions, and someone like Taylor Swift would sell out in an instant. And so, I mean, for that reason alone, I think they'd be crazy not to. But I think for all us Swifties out there, I think we'd love it. We'd love to go and see all her clothes in an exhibition and give them the reverence they deserve.
Yes,
It's a great idea.
It's a great, and just you know, we talked about our other sort of role model during the 80s, Mr. Morrissey. Do you sort of feel that he's still got a certain style and swagger that works for him?
Well, I certainly think that people look back at his kind of moments in the sun, particularly, as you say, in that kind of like the mid-80s time, and kind of consider him to be a sartorial role model just for the fact that he would wear, you know, women's blouses and sort of have that huge quiff. And, you know, he was a real, you know, even though he's sort of this kind of shy outsider who had a massive opinion, he had a great look. And I think that having any moment in your life where you've had a great look is almost enough. You know, maybe we can all only ever hope for one great look, and he certainly had one great look.
Yes, it's just kind of interesting watching how he looks now and sort of dressing in quite a sort of interesting style. I think it kind of goes with his physique now, but it's just kind of interesting. Still having a certain, you know, love of Morrissey, but a complicated relationship, put it that way. So,
Yeah.
yes, we love him. And then, you know, obviously this has been brilliant timing with this book. Have you got any other artists or projects that are on the go or sort of in the back
Yeah,
burner?
well, we've got Beyonce coming out early next year, and I've done a sort of my first kind of retro book about a band, which I'll let you know. I've done a Spice Girls book,
Yes.
which was really good fun. So those are the next two coming up, and I'm working on a slightly different book at the moment, but all shall be revealed. Yeah, so it's a slightly different book about kind of a different kind of fashion role model, but the two in the fashion biography music series, Beyonce and the Spice Girls. Yeah, so those two are
Brilliant.
coming
Well,
out.
I have to say this is great. Well, thank you ever so much for giving me the time for this. I'll just put my head. Yes, so there's me. There you go. There's me. Yeah. Well, Terry, thank you. This has been brilliant.
Okay.
And yes, I have to say I've really enjoyed looking at the book, and it's been really lovely to also read it. I love all those bits with people like Carole King and Jimi Hendrix and sort of the history of fashion as well. So it's been fantastic. So all the best for that. And yes,
Thanks.
I can send your
Thank you
PR
so much for
person a
inviting me
link.
on. Thank you.
Yes. Well, look, have a lovely merry midwinter and Christmas, and I'll say goodbye.
Thank you so much, David. See you
Take
again
care.
soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
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 I know, it's a lovely ending. I love keeping those bits in. It just always sounds so sort of, yes, indecisive, which is my middle name. Well, not really. But anyway, look, a massive thank you to Terry Newman for giving me the time for that interview. As you can tell, we're just before Christmas 2023 on the world that is Taylor Swift and the clothes, fashion, style, and much more. And as I said, that's on ACC Art Books, which is an amazing publishers, and have done some incredible books on music, creativity, and lots more. Available from all good bookshops and also online. And if you want to contact me, the C86 Show, you can on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Just do C86 Show. You can find it there. And yes, all these interviews have been archived on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean. It's true. Have a great week. Stay safe.